Well, first I just want to make sure that people can actually see my screen, so I'm hoping that actually works.
We definitely can.
Okay, so I'm not going to be able to see the audio. I'm going to try to see if my phone will do this real quick, but we'll just see. So, hi everyone, I'm Michelle again. So thank you for putting up with me. This time we're doing criminal profiling, but this time we're doing it strictly with anime characters. So once again, trying to look at the monsters and figure out how we can make sense of them, because, you know, that's the logical thing to do. And by logical, I mean rapid fangirl thing to do. So in case you're curious why I'm broke in the head, I'd like to introduce you to my very first boyfriend. I mentioned him yesterday. I met him whenever I was a little girl. It's a show, Tales from the Crypt. He is the crypt keeper, and I absolutely loved him. He showed up every day. He was always on time. He was just the perfect boyfriend. And as you can tell, he's not exactly the prettiest, so it wasn't about looks. It was entirely about the true emotions under there. Oh, I know. But with this, something that saddened me was whenever I figured out that he was not real. So I had a huge issue with that. I got very sad when I found out he was a puppet, but then I discovered Freddy. So my life got a little bit better. So the fact that that's how I always went for guys when I was a kid probably explains why I am completely crazy now that I'm an adult. So once again, just the disclaimer I like putting in front of this for anyone who might be watching. If you're expecting this profiling to be anything like Mentalist, Criminal Minds, definitely the wrong panel for that, because that's just not realistic. This is actually showing you how to go through and do some of this as far as if you have the training, tells you how the person would. So my qualifications, I'm just going to kind of gloss over these because I did go over these yesterday. I do have a master's in clinical psychology. I held a position where I regularly conducted interviews. I didn't do diagnoses for people. So my job was actually going through and making sure that I got it right. I interned as a counselor in training over at Greene County Jail, over at the Portland Prison, did that for quite a while. Had a lot of fun. My favorite part was actually giving different kinds of gambits of tests and stuff. I'm weird, I like doing that. And I also worked in the criminal justice system for 6 years. So I was a probation officer for a while. I worked in secure detention for a while. So all that means is that I'm really good with handcuffs. You know, like people actually need that. So another frightening thing about this panel, and I know I told Zach this yesterday about my other panel, but this is also true for this one as well. This is actually reviewed. So what I mean by that is that other people with qualifications have also looked over this and had input as well. So I didn't just throw diagnoses at a board and I'm like, yeah, I think this fits. I actually went to other people to make sure that they agreed, to make sure I wasn't just throwing this out willy-nilly. So before I really get going on this, I just want to remind you, absolutely no self-diagnosing when I'm going through this. That's just not healthy for you. It's not healthy to try to think about how someone you know might have these diagnoses thinking, oh, well, that sounds kind of familiar. That's not what this is. This is fun. And there's a lot that goes into it. So if you're feeling depressed, things like that, that doesn't mean that you're a crazy psychopath. You know, unless you are a crazy psychopath, in which case, don't come towards me, please. So the first one we're going to be going through today as far as anime-wise is Psycho-Pass. Now, for anyone who hasn't seen this anime or the other ones, I apologize. There are going to be spoilers, so can't help you there. We have to go through this. So from Psycho-Pass, we have one of my favorite villains in anime, SHOGO Makishima. So whenever we're going through, we want to know as much about him as we really can. So what we know about SHOGO is one of his known aliases, Yukimura Shibata. He's actually not even born yet. He will be born 65 years from now, according to the show. So his birth date in that is October 14, 2085. In the show, he's 27 years old, though. So for the sake of actually trying to do any diagnoses, we're going to look at what his age in the show is, not his age now, because otherwise we can't diagnose that at all. His profession, he's an art teacher, kind of, because that's his job in the show as a cover. But it's as close as he has to a legit job, so that's what we're going to think of. Now, his background is something that drives me a little bit crazy. His mother is unknown. His father is unknown again. And this is something I always just think of as lazy writing. It drives me crazy. So with that, we don't have any information about them. We can't get a hold of any diagnostic information about them or any implications possibly, which cuts us off from a lot of information that would be really good to know. So we can at least look at his background. Well, something from him is that he realized at a very young age that his psychopaths never became cloudy. Now, for those of you who haven't watched the show, what that means is that in this futuristic world, there are machines and computers that can actually scan people as they go by, and it shows what they call a psychopath. So it tells the person how, and it says how emotionally stable or unstable that person is, and it gives them different kind of standards. And if they reach a certain point, because they're too unstable, they're too violent, they're too and upset and depressed, it can actually give them different levels, and then they have to actually be rehabilitated. But in the show, people don't really get rehabilitated, usually just get locked up for life. But with him, no matter what he did, no matter how violent he was, he never showed up on that. He never had a cloudy psychopath, which means that he could do the most heinous things and he would never be acknowledged by the system for that. Meanwhile, other people are. So even though that sounds like a great thing for him, it actually can lead to some feelings of isolation. So that's something that could have started leading to some problems for him early on in life. So we also want to think about what his hobbies are. So for SHOGO, he reads about one book a day. So he's very intellectual. He likes to keep busy that way. His hobbies include quoting philosophers and classic authors. Seems kind of normal. I know some people who actually do that. He also practices martial arts, and then he finds and then motivates killers. So that's where we kind of have a departure. So what he likes doing is finding them, giving them everything they need, grooming them, and setting them loose upon the world, and sitting back and enjoying the havoc. Why? Because he wants to. He's essentially like a gigantic cat. He likes swatting the dog, getting it to get upset, and watching the dog get in trouble. So some of his presenting problems. So things that he might have some issues with. Oh, hey, Nora, just saw you logged in. So some presenting problems for him. One thing is that he's unable to be identified as being criminally minded by the system. So like I said, his psychopath does not get, I'm 30, nothing happens like that. He ends up just slipping through the cracks. Another thing is he has to avoid any kind of capture in order to avoid being assimilated. So the civil system has this wonderful little thing where for those who are above the system and can't be really identified, it likes finding them, taking their brains and assimilating it into the system. So congratulations, you literally get to become part of the machine if you're one of those people. Due to that, he has to do everything he can to try to avoid getting captured. So here are some questions, and I'm gonna put some of them out there, and I'm gonna kind of wait to see if anyone types in. If you don't, I'll give it a few seconds. So the first question is, why would you want to consider things such as SHOGO's hobbies and interests? Second question is it fair to diagnose SHOGO with the current DSM, so the current diagnostic standard that we have, if he was born 65 years from now? Now I do the awkward sipping my tea while giving you all a chance to answer. Okay, I'm seeing that it's finally coming up on the screen on my phone, so I'm trying to follow along to see what you guys are seeing. So with this, some things I'm just going to start saying while I'm waiting to see if anyone types in is that one of the reasons why we would want to consider his hobbies and his interests is because it's going to tell us a lot about him. It's going to tell us what motivates him, what drives him, what's going to make him do what he does. And that motivation tells us a lot about him. It also tells us where he's putting his energy, where he's putting his time. So is he putting his time towards helping the homeless, even though he has some of these negative thoughts? Nope, he's actively acting upon them. And one question that's on here is as far as if it's okay to diagnose him with the current DSM. The answer is absolutely not. 65 years from now, we should have very different standards, or at least have an updated DSM. Well, it takes a while for that thing to get updated sometimes. But as society changes and as ideas change, so does that, because we have to try to move it along. So for instance, at one point, homosexuality was something that was labeled in the DSM. Now that is no longer in there. Why? Because it's no need to be. That's not a mental illness. That's something that people are. You love someone. That's great. So things that we have in there now may not be considered any kind of mental illness in the future. Also, we may be adding things in there that we don't see now just based upon technology and changes in culture. So, sorry, psychology geek, I get all excited about those things. So if we're actually looking at his diagnoses, something that I would be diagnosing him with would be antisocial personality disorder. This is something he certainly qualifies for. He fulfills criteria for failure to conform to lawful behavior. Is it lawful to create all kinds of havoc, to instigate and enable killers? No, actually that's an accessory. He also uses alias and lies or cons others for his own amusement. He takes pleasure in the havoc that he causes. So there's something where you're able to see how he actually has that negativity and how that impacts the world. Does he behave aggressively and does he act out? Yes, this is actually demonstrated by him killing people directly as well as through others. So yeah, he's a pretty aggressive guy, not someone you want to take home to mom. And he doesn't care about the safety of others. It's kind of hard to care about their safety whenever you're killing them. And he completely lacks remorse. To him, people who are in that system, people who are like that, are just pieces of a cog. They aren't anyone that's going to actually matter. So why does it matter if you kill them? Because that's kind of what his rationale is. So he meets 5 out of 7 criteria. He only needs to meet 3 to be able to qualify for this. Another thing that's important for this is we do see indications, if we were looking at the backstory and all of that, that he would have been diagnosed with conduct disorder whenever he was younger. So once again, age plays a part in psychology, because even if he's younger and he's showing all these same behaviors, we wouldn't label him antisocial, we'd be looking more conduct. But then if he never had any of that, and then he suddenly started having these behaviors, couldn't really look at doing antisocial, we'd have to look at a different diagnosis, because something else would be more what's going on then. So, sorry, hope you guys are doing okay. I'm not seeing much in the chat, so I'm not sure. So something else he would qualify for is narcissistic personality disorder. And if you've ever seen the show, you can find a lot of implications of this. He has a huge sense of entitlement. He has very unreasonable expectations of others. He thinks that he is above the system and above others because he can't be part of the, and he can't be classified, sorry, word think, can't be classified like a lot of other people can. So he thinks that because of that, he's above it. And since the system is also after him, well, that makes him even more special. So granted, not the best for him, but still, he does believe he's just special and unique and can only be understood by others who are special and unique. In this, he actually really latches on to a specific officer who he lets know, essentially, you're the only one who can understand me. So he has a lot of that. He also looks for like special status, high status people. He is definitely preoccupied with fantasies of ultimate success. As a matter of fact, he thinks that is the only possibility for him. So that's something that has a pretty big impact on that. And this is one that shows up quite a bit in narcissistic personality disorder. He's interpersonally exploitative. So he doesn't have friends. He has pawns that he uses. He doesn't have anyone that he has a close relationship, because all of those relationships are just something that he can then use later on. He also lacks empathy. Why should he feel sorry for the ants that he's crushing? And he definitely shows arrogant and haughty behaviors or attitudes. So with this, he only has to meet 5 of these criteria to be able to diagnose with this. He meets 6 of those criteria to be diagnosed with this. So definitely on that level. So the next anime I'm going to be doing is Tokyo Ghoul. So with this, I just want to remind you guys, if you have any questions, if you have anything you want to ask, definitely type it in, because otherwise I'm going to have no way of knowing. So just let me know if you have questions. So with Tokyo Ghoul, with this, I had to honestly watch the show, and I kept getting distracted by the fact that the lead character actually has more issues than really anyone else in the entire show. So picking out a bad guy to diagnose was kind of difficult because I'm just like, but Kaneki is so messed up. I could do this. But the thing's entirely about villains. So sad face. So with this, the villain that I picked was SHUU Tsukiyama. His known alias, once again, we like knowing if someone has an alias, if they have other names that they go by, is the Gourmet. He is 21 years old and he is a college student. So he's not out in the workforce yet, but he is trying to get an education. And his major is social welfare. And the reason why that is so very funny is because he eats people. So it's kind of like getting to know the livestock really well and trying to get them all patched up before going in for the kill. Or something else that could be argued is that this would be tactical because if he's working in social work, that gives him access to underprivileged populations, vulnerable populations, so kind of securing his future food source there. Definitely a messed up way. It's a brilliant thing that they did with that. So I liked how they did that. His parents, once again, we have no information about mom. For some reason, moms in anime just don't make it very long. I think it's because they end up getting that mom hairdo early on in life as soon as the kid's born, and then they're dead. So whatever you do, don't do your hair that way. But he does have his dad who is actively involved in his life. And with that, he may have grown up without his mother, but he had a very strong relationship with his father. His father wasn't really the best model for him in how things should go. His father is one of the people who taught him to be, exploitative with people. He didn't teach him to have strong friendships. He didn't teach him to have strong values. He taught him to be the strongest, and if you're stronger, then that's all that matters. So something else about SHUU is even in his background, even in his present, whenever we first meet him in the show, he has extraordinarily poor social skills. He doesn't see people as friends. He merely sees them as pets whenever he's being kind. And usually he only sees them as food. So not really how you make friends, or at least not how most of us would think about making friends. So let's think about his presenting problems. Some of the things that make things difficult for him and with him. So things that we're going to be looking at to go, that's jacked up. We should probably try to diagnose this. So first of all, he eats human flesh. If you think that's normal, I have many questions for you. That is not. I mean, there are circumstances like the Donner Party. That's definitely different. But with him, that's his primary source of nutrition. He also has a very limited emotional response or expression. He doesn't present. He doesn't show what he feels. So even whenever you're having a conversation with him, even whenever you're engaging with him, you're not going to know what's really going on behind the face. He also begins to obsess over Kaneki. So the main character becomes one of his main obsessions, really. He goes so far with this that whenever he finds out about Kaneki and he decides how delicious he smells and that he has to have a bite, he actually enrolls in the same university. From there, he actually betrays the group that he's a part of simply to get closer to Kaneki. And then he also likes to keep a handkerchief of Kaneki's blood. So something that he does in the show is he keeps a Ziploc baggie complete with a handkerchief inside covering Kaneki's blood that is so delicious because he's a rare beast. He's essentially a unicorn. He's part human, he's part ghoul. And that apparently makes the Gourmet want to figure out just how tasty that could be. So what he does with his handkerchief is he does things like go into the bathroom by himself in a stall, take it out and deeply inhale it. And he seems to enjoy it just a little bit too much. But that's something that definitely keeps coming up with him. Other issues with SHUU is that he kills very easily. He kills without remorse or mercy. He doesn't see people as anything, but then again, he also doesn't see ghouls as anything because something else he does is he encourages cannibalism. So he's not just eating people, he's also eating other ghouls.
Hey, real quick, I'd like to actually ask a question. Tokyo Ghoul was an anime I actually got into. I didn't watch the entirety of it. I need to go back to it, but I did enjoy it. But encourages cannibalism. That cannibalism itself is bad, but for them, it's really just eating. So why specifically is encouraging cannibalism kind of a presenting problem in his case? I'm just curious.
with him, it's because ghouls don't eat other ghouls. That's actually a very strong social norm
okay,
that they have.
okay.
So he just doesn't eat people. He also eats others of his own kind. So for instance, that would be like eating a cow or something is normal for you. But if you started eating, Jeff, that would be a lot different.
Okay. All right. Well, Jeff, you're safe then. All right. And no, that makes a lot of sense. So thank you.
Okay. Feel free to jump in. People are being kind of quiet. So I'm just like, I don't know if I'm boring. So something else we would want to consider, and Zach, feel free to jump in with any questions you have, is things that he says. So kind of like what I was talking about with yesterday when I was talking about Pinhead, is with SHUU, we actually have some great quotes as well. One of the things he says is you don't need to blame yourself just because you've hurt someone. Just like when you're walking, you can't really blame yourself to crush some ants. That's what being the stronger one means. So this goes back to what he learned from his father very early on, but this also tells us that he's not going to really be able to have those good relationships. He's not going to really be able to have friends because friends don't exist. It's simply the strong living and taking advantage of the weak to live better. So if we're thinking about what his diagnoses might be, some things that we're going to consider are questions. So first of all, why would we want to think about his quotes? Why would we want to consider what he's saying? And how does SHUU in the later manga differ from anime? So does this affect the possible diagnoses? So those are just things that I'm curious about, and I'm going to give it just a few seconds because I know there's about a 6-second delay to see if anyone wants to chime in and answer on that. So once again, drinking the kitty.
Okay, I mean, it's very telling about who he is as a person, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if his use of the word ants is, or rather, as his example, is kind of indicative of how he sees other people, probably.
Definitely. So with that, that tells you how he views others, how he values them, which is not at all. But something else that's really telling about that quote is it's something that's completely unsolicited. It's something that we see while he's actually just out and about in his regular life. So it gives us a lot about him as a, being, not necessarily a person, but as a ghoul, without having a very structured way of doing it. We actually get an idea of what his daily thoughts are, which I think is fun. But did you ever read the manga on this?
I did not.
Well, in the manga, he actually develops a lot more as a character. He starts to actually see Kaneki as a friend. He starts to develop feelings. He starts to have all those crazy things that happen whenever you have a heart. Essentially, he's Howl, and he got the heart back, and now he has to deal with the feelings of it.
Mm-hmm.
So that would definitely affect that diagnosis, but it's something that we're not going to look at because most people don't go that deep in the rabbit hole. So, it looks like a quote, someone came up. So Stephen said that quotes and word choice give insight into personality. It's a window into his mind. Absolutely, that is 100% right, Stephen. So thank you. It's nice to see that other people think about that stuff too. So whenever you're thinking about what his diagnosis might be, there's a lot of things that come into mind. So I've talked about narcissistic personality disorder. I've talked about antisocial personality disorder. So if you're thinking about what his would be, there's several possibilities. So some of the possibilities we would do when we're looking at diagnoses is sometimes we do what we call differential diagnoses. We try to think of different things, we try to rule them out. So we're trying to figure out what it could be or what would be a better fit. So possibilities for him, if we're looking at this, is you might consider pica, which is persistent eating of non-nutritive, non-food substances for over a period of at least 1 month. This doesn't really fit to him because he's a ghoul. Humans are nutritive. So not really, but we're thinking maybe an eating disorder because it just can't be normal to eat people, right? So the eating behavior is not culturally supported. Once again, by people, not supported. By ghouls, definitely supported. So the cow doesn't want you to eat it, but by normal standards, as far as people who aren't vegans or vegetarians, eating that cow is probably perfectly normal. So your culture is going to be very different from that of your food source. And if eating the behavior occurs in the context of another mental disorder, it is sufficiently severe enough to warrant an additional clinical diagnosis. This isn't due to anything else. So we don't have to consider that. So something that's hilarious about this is it an eating disorder? Absolutely not. For him, this is very culturally supported. Steven, definitely, Pika for a ghoul would be hilarious. I would laugh about that. Albert Fish, he had Pika if we want to go into serial killers. SHUU? Nope. He's just going out for a good steak. So something else we might consider is we might consider fetishistic disorder. So that's something where over a period of at least 6 months, you have recurrent and intense sexual arousal for either the use of non-living objects as manifested by fantasies, urges, or behaviors. Whenever you see him with that handkerchief and you're seeing how he's reacting and you're seeing everything else going on, there is a potential argument for that. He seems to enjoy that blood entirely too much. So we want to consider the next step. The fantasies, urges, behaviors cause clinically distress or impairment in social, occupational, or other important areas of functioning. Well, it doesn't really cause him any distress. He seems pretty happy with it. It doesn't seem to cause him any problems with social life. Kind of hard to whenever you don't have one. So it's just one of those things where you never quite know where this is going to be. So next part, would it be the fetishistic objects are not limited to articles of clothing, cross-dressing, or devices specifically designed for the purpose of sexual stimulation? Is your blood designed for sexual stimulation? No. So I don't know. So with this, is it fetishistic disorder? Is it paraphilic disorder? Nope, nothing. Why can we not diagnose him with anything? Well, the answer for that is we can't diagnose him with anything because he may have a body similar to that of a person, but he's not a human. DSM is for people. It's kind of like Soylent Green. It's people. So SHUU is a ghoul, which is a completely different species. And while they may be compatible with humans, because you see them hooking up with humans quite a bit in the show later on, they are not humans. They're completely separate. So they have a different set of social norms. So we would have to have an entire DSM normed and based off of ghouls, which I would personally love. I wish that there was things like that. So as SHUU is a ghoul, he cannot have any kind of diagnosis based off of people. So I think that's kind of cool. Looks like there's something from Harrington. Dim family is here. Aw, that's so sweet.
Hi, Harrington. I believe she's referring to before your panel, we had Ricky.
Oh, I saw that, and I was just reading that. So I know that's not for me, but that was adorable.
Yeah, it really was. Thank you, Harrington. It's good to have you here.
Hey, Zim, I'm always a fan of, so I'm jealous of that too. Okay, so the next anime I'm going to be doing is also an Otome game. So one question I have, Zach, can you chime in real quick?
Absolutely. What's up?
So here's the question. Do you know what Otome games are?
If I can guess, is it like essentially like interactive or virtual novel? Because I'm familiar with what Amnesia is, because I have it on my PS4 because I got it for free from PlayStation Plus. So I'm familiar with what kind of game Amnesia is, but an Otome game, that's what I would guess is what it is.
Yeah, it's a dating game, usually geared towards women and girls, but it's something where you usually have a female protagonist who has to try to win over someone.
Yeah.
So with this, I know that you've probably seen some of this. So with those dating games, do you usually think that those are safe, or are those usually things that can be scary?
You kind of cut out. Can you repeat that question?
Okay. So with that, with these dating games, do you think that's something that's usually safe and fun, or is it something that's potentially scary?
I mean, yes, it could definitely. I mean, there's definitely instances where it's one or the other. Though something tells me where you're going with this is, in this case, it's probably the latter, probably the more dangerous one.
It definitely is. So in this game, you have the choice of essentially either dating or dying. And if you don't romance this character just right, you're definitely going to die. Does that seem normal?
No, that's definitely not ideal.
No, I don't think so. I definitely would not be going out into that dating world with that being out there. So with this, the character we're going to talk about, I'm sorry, Zach, I just had to bounce that back and forth because that's something that always drives me crazy.
It's fun.
So the character for this is actually UKYO. His known alias is he's known as Shinigami. which is a god of death. His route is called the Joker route. So as you're going through this game, each one of the routes has like the diamond route, the spade route, going off cards, but here we have the Joker route, which is the wild card. You never quite know how it's going to be, and that's actually really well named as far as foreshadowing goes. His age, he's 24 years old. Hooray, we have a character that is in their mid-20s, or at least really close to it. His occupation, he actually has one. He's a photographer. We're very proud. He actually does his job. His family, his parents are unknown, so we're back to unknown backgrounds. We don't know anything about that. His grandfather has a very original name. His grandfather is called Grandfather. So super original there. His background, though, he actually has quite a bit going on. He's lived in France, he's lived in Chile, he's lived in Japan. He's moved all over, and that's something he's done throughout his life and also as part of his job as a photographer. In school, he didn't really have good grades, but it's interesting that we're able to pick up on that and be able to know that. And something else that's interesting about this character is he has an apartment, but he never uses it. He's always sleeping in the park. He ends up, as you play through the game, you find him sleeping in random areas, but never in his apartment, even though he continues to own it and pay for it. So that's something that's kind of interesting to know about him. So presenting problems with this character, with that luscious, wonderful green hair, he ends up dying frequently. And throughout the game, as you play the different routes, he shows up in every one of those routes. And during that time, his death happens in a number of different ways. Sometimes he kills himself. Sometimes he dies protecting the heroine. So sometimes he's protecting you and he ends up dying to try to make sure that you get to live. And once again, he's a character with Goku syndrome, as I like to call it, because even though he dies, he's always back. He ends up showing back up. You just can't escape it. So he also alternates between trying to save the heroine and trying to kill the heroine. So some days he loves you, some days he hates you. And what's weird is his methods of killing vary quite a bit, which is interesting because if you're looking at killers, usually they have kind of an MO that they follow. But with him, he's resourceful. He's like Jason Voorhees. He'll use what's ever there. So sometimes he drowns you. Sometimes he stabs you. Other times he just gets other people to do the dirty work and kill you instead. Now, that's definitely not going to be good for dating. I mean, you can't really get a second date if you're not breathing, but maybe that's just my thoughts. Something else is that he's a pretty big stalker. Throughout the entire game, no matter which route, he's always showing up because he's always watching you. He feels like he has to keep an eye on you. Whether it's to help you or kill you is entirely up for debate depending on which route it is. But he's always there. And with that, he has an obsession with it. No matter what, he always makes sure to make a point to interact with the character at some point. He wants the heroine to know about him, but he doesn't. So he wants to be involved, but he's not too involved. He always has to watch, though. Not normal. He also has dual personalities that have very little awareness of one another. Oh, Roberta, just saw your message. Yes, he would be a very lousy date. I would not want to go out with that guy. So he has dual personalities that have very little awareness of one another. So whenever he's trying to help the heroine, whenever he's trying to be kind to her, he is completely in love with her. I'm just completely enamored. Everything is about her. His safety is secondary. All he wants to do is make sure she lives. But then he has another personality that is completely driven by, I must kill the heroine. She's awful, she's evil, no matter what happens, she has to die. So with this, he frequently switches from one to the other. And you're not really sure which it's going to be because he still has that wonderful, charming smile. So it's just one of those where you're just never quite sure. So then what's interesting about this is actually a pretty good representation because personalities don't always know what's going on. So he has entire gaps in times where he has no idea what's going on. And if you're playing the game and you're curious why this happens, what comes to light is the fact that he ends up having, in the original story, something where he's trying to save the heroine. So he ends up getting stuck in this time loop and he has to keep trying to save her over and over and over. And throughout all these times, he keeps dying and he keeps dying, which makes his mental state more and more unstable with each new time that he's going through. So he started out this sweet, wonderful, caring boyfriend, and by the end, it's just basically kill her in this timeline, get it over with. I can't even be bothered to live. So some things coming up on here is Harrington, yep, no dating this guy, no matter how pretty and tempting he looks. In Visioncon, Goku Syndrome brings up an interesting thought. Even though an immortal can be a human, can the DSM still be applied? Well, I mean, it would kind of depend on the immortal, I would think, because if we're talking about something like a Highlander, I think it could be applied because they're people, they just have an extraordinarily long lifespan. So they still have the ability to die in the right circumstances. So they're not necessarily a different species. So this is a bit of a departure, but I think it would depend on the kind of immortal. So if we're talking about that, yes. If we're talking the tall man from Phantasm, not so much. But we would have a really difficult time getting together a group of immortals to create a new DSM from. So even if it's not ideal, this is what we would be left with as long as they are human, or at least as close to human as possible. And then Stephen typed in, the question of can an immortal be typed on the DSM is very fascinating to me. Well, I would be curious about that too. So I hope that kind of answers it. If you have more questions on that, definitely let me know because I would like to have some fun chats on those things. So keep typing in here. I like these thoughts. So some questions for you. First of all, why would we want to know about where UKYO has lived? Why would it be important to know where this character has been, what he has done, what's going on in his life?
I mean, just gives us more background to him, kind of, maybe lets us know what to expect by how he acts, and maybe hopefully not be where he is when he's at places.
That's a good answer. Why would you think that we'd want to consider his age when we're doing diagnoses? I know, I'm like the evil teacher who keeps calling on you.
No, I mean, you just got me there. Why do we include age when considering diagnosis? Well, I mean, maybe because their brain's not fully developed?
Potentially.
Okay, all right.
So think about this. If we have someone who's 35 years old and we have someone who's 16, would we want to use the same criteria?
And then to answer the last question, I mean, I'd like to know too, because I, put a lot of care and time into my hair, and this is about the best it probably gets. So.
Okay, so your answer on the first one was right. We need to know those things. Another thing that Stephen just brought up on this is different cultures can impact his behaviors. That's completely true because cultural norms come into this. So what's considered normal in one culture may not be normal in another. So what we consider as perfectly fine isn't going to show up in another. So for instance, I know I've been to Japan and I was the weirdo over there because I would smile and laugh a lot. And whenever I had creepers coming up to me on the bus, I may or may not have been fairly rude. Yeah, I scared a guy. But I don't care about that because for Americans, if you do that, we're going to react. There's no question about it. In Japan, though, a lot of times it's considered better to be quiet, to not cause problems. For one of the reasons we would want to consider age is differences in the developmental, like you were saying. So with that, if we have someone who's 16 versus someone who's 30, developmentally, they're going to be very different. Their brain hasn't developed as much at the younger age, but also we don't want to give a label and a stigma to someone who's too young that can completely alter their life if we can avoid it. That's one of the reasons why we look at conduct disorder and we're not even considering something as harsh as antisocial personality disorder for some of those younger people. Because whenever you label someone as being psychotic, whenever you're labeling someone as being aggressive, as narcissistic, you're giving them a label that can then become something that can define their life and the way that others view them. And that's just not fair to do to a child. As a matter of fact, it's not fair to do sometimes to adults. It's something that we try to really be cognizant of whenever we're giving those diagnoses. And the question about how he keeps his hair so pretty, I don't have the answer for that one, Zach. That's something I just want to know because I'm very jealous because I have long hair and it constantly gets tangled and his is long and luscious and I probably have a problem because no matter how much I've played this route, I still love this character and I just keep trying to not die. So a diagnosis that this character has that's actually really beautifully represented in the game as well as in the anime, the game more so though because you get a lot more information, is he qualifies for dissociative identity disorder. He definitely has 2 or more distinct personalities that lead to a loss of self, alternations in affect, which means that he goes from being very happy and loving to suddenly psychotic, going to kill you. These are 2 different personalities. He has differences in behaviors, his consciousness changes, his memory changes, so what one personality remembers, the other one may not. So there's times whenever his evil personality takes the heroine places and hides her and does these terrible things, and then whenever he switches over to the other one, he has no memory, no recollection of what happened. He can't figure out what's going on, so he has to try to get into the mindset that the others figure it out. But they aren't communicating, they aren't sharing memories, which is actually a very wonderful representation of what that looks like. He also has differences in perception and cognition. The way he thinks is different. The way he perceives the world is different. So if he sees someone doing something, or if he's watching something, in one personality it may be seen as sweet and endearing, and in the other one it may be seen as mocking. So this is something where he wouldn't really realize what was going on unless he started putting together the pieces with these loss of consciousness. But then also he's figuring this out from the other characters, because even the heroine's kind of pointing out to him that he's acting different from one point to another. So something that just came up was with Visioncon, to piggyback off Stephen, would his DSM be based off of the nurture portion of the nature versus nurture argument? That's something that could kind of go either way. We would probably be looking off of what we have. So with the nurture versus nature, nature would be kind of along lines of what's going on. Nurture is how he's brought up, how he's done. So for instance, if we have someone who is, I don't know, let's just say Australian, not too different, but let's say we have someone who's Australian, who's brought up in China. Then if they're brought up in China, we're going to consider them more by Chinese norms, because that's something that they were brought up culture-wise, because we think of a lot of that. But nurture and nature can come into play with that. Sorry, I'm getting off topic with that. And how can we know when we don't, and how can we know when we don't know about his parents? Too little background. That's exactly right, Stephen. That's something where I keep griping about these animes and these shows where they don't tell us anything about their parents' background. But we don't know anything. We know nothing about his parents. We only know his grandfather was called grandfather. That drives me nuts. Give me some background. Give me some material to work with. But then again, I don't think they're really looking at people to diagnose these characters. But it's fun, so I'm going to keep doing it. So definitely keep up these comments. Loving it. So something else that's interesting in this is his gaps in memory are not consistent with normal forgetting. These are things that are genuinely due to these 2 things. His symptoms are causing clinically significant distress. He keeps killing the woman he loves. That's definitely going to upset him. So that's something they did well. It's not culturally appropriate. So this is something where it's a complete departure. There's no culture where it's really normal to go from one to the other. But if he was from a culture where having those dual personalities was considered normal, then we wouldn't really be able to consider this as much. Now, I don't know of any culture where that is the point, where that is the case, but if it were, we would not necessarily be looking at this. Another thing is saying that it's not chemically induced, which is important because we're saying that it's not due to drugs, it's not due to medications, it's not due to any kind of substance. These are important because sometimes, and I've seen this happen, you'll see people come in who are high on meth or whatever like that, and they are acting like a completely different person. They are not the same person at all whenever they have that. But it's not dissociative identity disorder, it's simply due to that. It's due to the substance, and when that substance is out of their system, hopefully then they can go back to that normal person that they are. So those are all things to consider. So with this, for Stephen, he just wrote, an intake with him would be a B. I would love to have an intake with this character. I would probably get into a lot of trouble though, because I'd probably keep trying to just get him to tell me everything about himself, because I hate to admit it, I love this character. I don't know what it is. It's not normal. I have issues. But what's scary about this is in this game, he is one of the least scary characters. There's another one that's far worse. And oddly enough, in the rating polls, he is the most popular character. And he's in another panel that I do on that. But something with this that they did with UKYO, as far as with dissociative identity disorder, is something I did mention earlier, is he keeps killing himself in these different routes as well. And with that, that's actually a pretty accurate representation of this, because the suicide risk in people who have dissociative identity disorder, DID for short, is actually 70%. So the fact that we have a character who is so distraught, who has these reactions, and who does take those measures sometimes is actually a pretty good representation. So I don't know that the authors realized what they did, but it's very well done. So the next show I'm going to go on to is Future Diary. If you've ever seen this, then you probably know the character I'm about to do. One of the original overly attached girlfriends, Gasai. I'm going to kind of make this fast because I'm running out of time.
All right, so I'm guilty of something. I actually am a big fan of hers.
Oh, really?
Yep, yeah, I know.
So I have my psychopath that I just picked, and this is your psychopath.
I mean, yeah. Well, one of them. I'm a man who enjoys yanderes. All right. We all have our vices. That's just mine.
Well, I have to ask if you've watched Yandere Simulator then.
I have not, because I feel like I'd just be called out too much.
There's an entire game where you play as the Yandere, and you have to keep trying to kill everyone who gets close to your guy.
Hold on 1 sec. Hold on. We lost the live feed.
Oh, you have?
All right, go for it.
So unfortunately we had that drop in feed, which cut us out of some time, so I'm sorry about that. I want to make sure I'm not going over the next person's panel time, so I'm gonna...
Oh, okay. Michaela actually chimed in as to what it was. I guess live runs for 8 hours only, and yeah, we started this at 10 a.m., so
oh, okay.
Actually, exactly 8 a.m. That's actually exactly 8 hours. So, ooh. Well, I really enjoyed this panel. I'm even though we didn't get to best girl, I really did. I was very informative, like all your others ones were, and I really recommend you guys checking out some of her more. I'm kind of frazzled because of the whole live thing, but that actually makes a lot of sense, Michaela. So thank you for telling me, so I know it wasn't something like on the tech end. But is there anywhere people can see more of your content or like more of your work? Make sure to plug whatever you want.
Well, I do have a Facebook page. I have the information on there. I have my Gmail account. I'm always happy to do conventions and stuff. So if anyone does conventions, if they want to have me do, let me know. If there's anything curious to contact me, I've had people contact me about everything, even how to get into grad school before. And I'm always open to doing new kinds of presentations. I actually once got asked to teach over the Dory Leadership Academy, so I taught for a summer portion because someone saw one of these. So I'm always open to new things. If you have questions, because we didn't really get to go into this so much, let me know. But also, Visioncon's nice enough to keep having me back, so hopefully see you guys at other Visioncons too. Don't be afraid to like it on Facebook. Don't be afraid to interact. I'm always happy to have fun because I always like having other geeks to talk to.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much again, Michelle. You're always such a wonderful person to be around.
Thank you. And I'll see you guys tomorrow for